Imagine this. You're 8 months pregnant, sitting in the doctor's office, excited for your ultrasound, when you accidentally discover intimate photos on your husband's iPad, him with his young secretary, lounging by a pool, whispering sweet nothings, while he lied about being on a business trip. Your world shatters. Your water breaks right there in the chaos. And as you're rushed to the hospital in labor, he prioritizes a meeting over being by your side. But this is just the beginning. What follows is a whirlwind of betrayal, financial sabotage, secret marriages, hidden genetic diseases, embezzlement from children's charities, and a fierce mother's revenge that turns the tables completely. From a devastated wife to an empowered entrepreneur. Sarah's story is a roller coaster of karma, twists, and ultimate triumph that will leave you breathless. Stick around to hear the full, gripping tale. It's packed with drama you won't believe. If this hooks you like it did me, hit that like button to show some love. Drop a comment with your thoughts on the biggest plot twist. Share with a friend who needs this empowerment boost. And don't forget to subscribe for more epic revenge stories and drama breakdowns. Let's dive in. Sarah Henderson sat in the plush waiting room of Dr. Elena Martinez's obstetrics practice, her 8-month pregnant belly making it difficult to find a comfortable position in the designer chair. The soft classical music and expensive artwork on the walls usually calmed her nerves. But today, something felt different. Her husband Rick's iPad lay forgotten on the side table, and she couldn't help but notice the notification bubble showing dozens of unread messages. Rick had been increasingly distant these past few months, always claiming urgent business meetings and late-night conference calls. As a successful real estate mogul, his Henderson Development Group had built half the luxury condominiums in their affluent Connecticut suburb. Sarah had supported his career for 15 years, transitioning from her own promising marketing executive position to become the perfect wife and homemaker their social circle expected. Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Martinez's warm voice interrupted her thoughts. "We're ready for your ultrasound." Sarah reached for Rick's iPad to move it aside, and the screen lit up automatically. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the photo gallery preview. There, in crystal clear detail, were intimate photographs of Rick and a young woman she recognized as Vanessa Torres, his personal secretary. They were lounging by a pool at what looked like an exclusive resort. Rick's hands wrapped around Vanessa's waist as she laughed at something he whispered in her ear. The classical music seemed to grow louder, more discordant, as Sarah's world began to crumble. She scrolled through more photos with trembling fingers. Rick feeding Vanessa champagne, Rick kissing her neck as the sunset painted the sky behind them. Rick looking happier than Sarah had seen him in years. These photos were taken last weekend when Rick had told her he was attending a crucial investors conference in Miami. He had called her every night, claiming exhaustion from long meetings and networking events. The pregnant wife betrayed by her millionaire husband scenario she had read about in magazines was now her devastating reality. Tears began falling onto her swollen belly as the iPad slipped from her trembling hands, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the elegant waiting room, and several other expectant mothers looked up with concern. Sarah felt like she was drowning, gasping for air as the weight of her husband's deception crashed over her. "Sarah!" Dr. Martinez appeared beside her, having heard the commotion. "Are you all right? Is it contractions?" Sarah couldn't speak. She just stared at the shattered screen of the iPad, seeing fragments of her husband's betrayal reflected back at her. This wasn't supposed to happen to women like her. She had done everything right, supported his career, maintained their beautiful home, been the perfect wife for his business image. They lived in a $6 million mansion, drove luxury cars, belonged to the most exclusive country club. Their life looked perfect from the outside. But now, like Alicia Florrick in The Good Wife, Sarah was discovering that her seemingly perfect marriage was built on lies and infidelity. The husband affair with mistress scenario she had watched play out on television was now her heartbreaking family drama. "I need to call my husband," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Martinez helped her to a private consultation room. Take all the time you need, dear. Your appointment can wait. With shaking hands, Sarah dialed Rick's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice bright and cheerful in a way that now made her sick. Hey, beautiful. How's my favorite pregnant lady ready for the big ultrasound? The casual affection in his voice felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Rick, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? You sound upset. Sarah closed her eyes, gathering courage she didn't know she possessed. Where were you last weekend? There was a slight pause, barely perceptible, but Sarah caught it. You know where I was? Honey, the investors' conference in Miami? We talked about this. Rick, I saw the photos on your iPad. Photos of you and Vanessa at a resort. Intimate photos. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Sarah could hear muffled voices in the background, probably his office staff. Finally, Rick spoke, his tone shifting to one she didn't recognize. Sarah, you're pregnant and emotional. Those photos are not what you think they are. Vanessa was helping me scout potential resort properties for the company. It was business. The lie came so smoothly, so practiced, that Sarah realized this wasn't the first time Rick had deceived her. How many other business trips had been cover stories for his midlife betrayal story? Business. Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. Rick, she's sitting on your lap in a bikini. You're kissing her neck. That's not a business meeting. Look, we can talk about this when I get home tonight. You're clearly upset and probably not thinking clearly. Pregnancy hormones can make women imagine things that aren't there. The condescending tone was the final straw. Sarah had supported this man through the early struggling years of his business, had given up her own career ambitions, had been the perfect wife for his wealthy husband image. And now he was gaslighting her, making her question her own eyes. Don't you dare blame this on pregnancy hormones. Richard, I know what I saw. Sarah, I'm in a crucial meeting right now. We'll discuss this at home like adults. I have to go. Before she could respond, Sarah felt a sudden, intense pressure in her lower abdomen. Then, unmistakably, her water broke, soaking through her designer maternity dress and onto Dr. Martinez's expensive carpet. Rick, my water just broke, she said urgently into the phone. The baby is coming. You need to get to the hospital now. There was another pause, and Sarah could hear papers shuffling and voices in the background. Right now, are you sure I'm in the middle of presenting to potential investors? This deal could set us up for life. Can't Jessica drive you to the hospital and I'll meet you there in a few hours? Sarah stared at the phone in disbelief. Her husband, the father of her child, was asking if his business meeting was more important than the birth of their baby. The wealthy man cheats with secretary narrative was becoming more real and more painful by the minute. A few hours, Rick. This is your child being born. Your first child. Of course I'll be there, sweetheart. I just need to wrap up this presentation. It shouldn't take too long. Call Jessica and tell her to drive you to Connecticut General Hospital. I'll meet you there as soon as I can. The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with her labor pains and the devastating realization that her marriage was over. As another contraction hit, stronger than the first, she understood that she was about to give birth not just to a baby, but to a completely new life as a single mother. Dr. Martinez rushed back into the room with a wheelchair. We need to get you to the hospital immediately. Have you called your husband? He's in a meeting, Sarah said bitterly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He'll be there when he can. As they wheeled her toward the elevator, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored doors. She looked pale, frightened, and utterly alone. The woman staring back at her was no longer the confident wife of a successful businessman. She was a pregnant wife betrayed, about to face the most important moment of her life, without the man who had promised to love and cherish her through everything. The elevator doors closed, and Sarah knew that when they opened again at the hospital, nothing would ever be the same. The ambulance ride to Connecticut General Hospital felt like an eternity. Sarah gripped the rails of the gurney as contractions came faster and stronger, each wave of pain accompanied by the crushing emotional weight of Rick's betrayal. The paramedic, a kind woman named Rosa, kept checking Sarah's vitals and offering reassurance. "First baby?" Rosa asked gently. "Yes," Sarah whispered, then added with bitter irony, "and possibly my last." Rosa squeezed her hand. "Don't worry about anything except bringing this little one safely into the world. Everything else can wait." But Sarah couldn't stop her mind from racing. The heartbreaking family drama unfolding in her life felt surreal. Just this morning, she had been planning the final touches for the nursery, excited about starting their family. Now she was facing the possibility of raising this child alone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Chen, her best friend and one of the city's most successful divorce attorneys. "On my way to the hospital, Rick called me. Are you okay?" Sarah managed to type back. "Water broke. Rick's still in meeting. Found photos of him with secretary." The response came immediately. "What, I'm 15 minutes away. Don't worry about anything except the baby right now." At the hospital, the admitting nurse asked for insurance information. Sarah provided their premium family plan details, but when the system pulled up their account, the nurse frowned. "I'm showing that your husband recently changed the policy. It looks like the maternity coverage has been modified. Let me call the insurance company to verify." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. Modified how? It appears the coverage was changed from family to individual last month. Maternity benefits have been significantly reduced. This was the first concrete sign of financial betrayal Sarah had encountered. Rick had been systematically preparing for her abandonment while she planned baby showers and picked out cribs. The wealthy husband cheating asset division scenario was already beginning, even before their child was born. Dr. Martinez arrived just as Jessica burst through the doors of the labor and delivery ward. Jessica took one look at Sarah's face and immediately understood that this was about more than just having a baby. "How far apart are the contractions?" Jessica asked, slipping naturally into crisis management mode. "About 4 minutes," Dr. Martinez replied. "We need to get her into a delivery room immediately." As they transferred Sarah to the delivery room, she saw Rick's familiar figure approaching down the hallway. He carried an enormous bouquet of white roses and wore his most charming smile, the same one that had won over countless business clients and had once made Sarah fall in love with him. "There's my beautiful wife," Rick announced loudly enough for the nursing staff to hear. "I'm so sorry I'm late. That investor meeting ran longer than expected, but I closed the biggest deal of my career. This baby is going to have everything." For a moment, Sarah felt a flutter of hope. Maybe she had misunderstood the photos. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. This was the Rick she remembered falling in love with, successful and devoted to their family. Rick leaned down to kiss her forehead, and Sarah caught the faint scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his collar. Vanessa's perfume. "Rick," she said quietly, "we need to talk about those photos." His expression shifted subtly, the charm becoming more calculated. "Sweetheart, you're in labor. This isn't the time for misunderstandings. Let's focus on our baby." Dr. Martinez checked Sarah's progress. "You're at 7 centimeters. It won't be long now." Rick's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it automatically. Sarah saw his face change as he read the message. Without thinking, he started to step away from her bedside. "I'll be right back," he said. "I need to take this call. It's urgent." "Rick, I'm about to give birth to your child," Sarah said, her voice rising. "What could possibly be more urgent than this? It's just a quick follow-up about the deal. 5 minutes, I promise." But Jessica had positioned herself where she could see Rick's phone screen, and her expression hardened. She grabbed Sarah's hand and squeezed it tightly. Rick stepped into the hallway, speaking in hushed tones. Through the partially open door, Sarah could hear fragments of his conversation. "I know, baby, I know. This is harder than I thought it would be. No, she doesn't suspect anything about the finances yet. After tonight, everything changes." Sarah's heart shattered completely. Her husband was talking to his mistress while she was in active labor with their child. The husband affair with mistress had reached a level of cruelty she hadn't imagined possible. Another contraction hit, this one so strong that Sarah cried out. Dr. Martinez called for Rick, but he was still on the phone. Jessica stepped into the hallway and physically grabbed Rick's arm. Your wife needs you right now, Jessica said firmly. End the call. Rick looked annoyed at the interruption but returned to Sarah's bedside, slipping his phone into his pocket. But the phone rang again immediately, and this time Rick didn't even try to hide his irritation at being pulled away from what was clearly a more important conversation. I have to take this, he said. It's about the contract signatures. But as Rick lifted the phone to his ear, Sarah heard a woman's voice, clear and intimate. Rick, honey, I can't wait for this to be over so we can finally be together. I made dinner reservations at that place you love. The voice belonged to Vanessa Torres. The room seemed to spin around Sarah, even in the middle of her labor, even as their child was about to be born. Rick was making plans with his mistress. The pregnant wife betrayed scenario had reached its most devastating point. Get out, Sarah whispered. What? Rick looked genuinely confused, as if he couldn't understand why she was upset. Get out of my delivery room. Get out now. Sarah, you're being irrational. Pregnancy hormones. I said get out. Sarah's voice carried throughout the labor ward. Several nurses looked up in alarm. Jessica stepped between Rick and the bed. I think you should leave. Now. Rick's mask of concern finally slipped completely. Fine. Call me when this drama is over and the baby is actually here. I'll be at the office. He walked out without another word, taking his flowers with him. Dr. Martinez looked shocked. I've never seen a father leave during active labor. He's not a father, Sarah said through gritted teeth as another contraction peaked. He's just a sperm donor who happens to be my husband. Jessica held Sarah's hand as the labor intensified. You're stronger than you know, Sarah, and you're not alone. For the next 3 hours, Sarah labored with only Jessica and the medical staff by her side. She thought of Elizabeth Gilbert's journey in Eat, Pray, Love, how sometimes the most transformative moments in life come when we're forced to find strength we never knew we had. At 11:47 p.m., Emma Grace Henderson entered the world, screaming and healthy, as Dr. Martinez placed the baby on Sarah's chest. Sarah felt a love more powerful than any betrayal, more enduring than any marriage. She's perfect, Jessica whispered, tears streaming down her face. But as Sarah held her daughter, she realized Emma's breathing seemed labored. Dr. Martinez quickly examined the baby and called for the neonatal team. She needs to go to the NICU, Dr. Martinez explained gently. Her oxygen levels are low. It's probably temporary, but we need to monitor her closely. As they wheeled Emma away to the neonatal intensive care unit, Sarah felt the full weight of her situation. She was alone, financially vulnerable, and now her baby needed specialized medical care that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jessica's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it and her face went pale. What is it? Sarah asked. Rick just posted on Instagram, Jessica said quietly. He's at the Four Seasons penthouse suite with Vanessa. The caption says, New beginnings with my love. Sarah closed her eyes, but the tears came anyway. While she had been giving birth to their child, while their baby fought for stable breathing in the NICU, Rick had been celebrating his new life with his mistress in a luxury hotel suite. The wealthy man's cheats with secretary narrative had reached its cruelest point, but Sarah was beginning to understand that this was only the beginning of her fight. As she lay in her hospital bed, exhausted and heartbroken, she made a silent promise to her daughter they would survive this. And Rick Henderson would learn that betraying his family came with consequences he had never imagined. The hospital room was quiet now except for the machines monitoring Sarah's recovery. Through her window, she could see the lights of the city where her husband was building a new life with another woman. But Sarah was already planning too. Her marketing skills, dormant for years, were awakening along with her maternal instincts. Rick had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the woman he was betraying. 2 weeks after Emma's birth, Sarah returned home from another exhausting NICU visit to find her world completely upended. The mansion she had lovingly decorated over 15 years felt like a museum of a life that no longer belonged to her. Every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every family photograph, every luxury item that had once represented their success now felt like evidence of a lie. Emma's health had stabilized, but the doctors warned that she would need several more weeks of monitoring and specialized care. The NICU bills were already astronomical, and Sarah had discovered that Rick's insurance modifications meant their out-of-pocket expenses would be devastating. As Sarah climbed the marble staircase to their master bedroom, she froze at the top of the landing. The door was open, and she could see designer clothing scattered across their bed. But not her clothing. These were expensive pieces she had never seen before. A Hermes handbag, a collection of La Perla lingerie still with tags attached, several dresses from boutiques Sarah recognized from her own shopping trips. Vanessa Torres had moved into Sarah's bedroom. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sat heavily on the top step of the staircase. The financial betrayal she had suspected was now accompanied by this ultimate violation of her home and marriage. Rick wasn't just having an affair, he was replacing her entirely. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Daniel Peterson from Peterson Legal Services. Your husband has retained our firm to handle urgent family matters. Please expect important documents to be delivered this afternoon." Sarah knew what was coming, but the reality still hit her like a physical blow when the doorbell rang an hour later. A courier handed her a thick envelope with her name written in elegant script. Inside were divorce papers. Rick was citing irreconcilable differences and claiming that Sarah had become emotionally unstable following their daughter's birth. The papers painted a picture of a woman suffering from severe postpartum depression who was unfit to care for a newborn. They requested temporary custody be awarded to the father pending psychological evaluation of the mother. Sarah sank onto the nursery floor, surrounded by the baby furniture she had spent months selecting. The crib stood empty, waiting for a daughter who might never come home to her. Rain began pattering against the windows, and Sarah finally allowed herself to break down completely. The woman who had once managed million-dollar marketing campaigns was being described in legal documents as mentally incompetent. The successful wife who had entertained Rick's business partners and supported his career was being painted as an unstable burden. The mother who had given birth alone while her husband celebrated with his mistress was being deemed unfit to raise her own child. Jessica arrived within an hour of Sarah's frantic phone call, carrying coffee and a folder of her own documents. "He's been planning this for months," Jessica said without preamble. "I've been making some calls, and Rick hired his divorce attorney 6 months ago. That's when you were in your second trimester. While I was planning the nursery and organizing baby showers, he was planning to leave me," Sarah whispered. "It's worse than that. He's been systematically moving assets out of your joint accounts. The insurance change was just the beginning. Your name has been removed from several investment accounts, the company business accounts, even the country club membership." Sarah felt like she was drowning. "How is that legal? It's not. But by the time we prove it in court, the damage will be done. He's left you with just enough money in your personal account to avoid immediate suspicion. But Sarah, you're looking at maybe 3 months of basic expenses, no health insurance, no access to the investment portfolio, no legal right to the business income." The magnitude of Rick's betrayal was becoming clear. This wasn't an impulsive affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated destruction of Sarah's life, orchestrated over months while she trustingly planned their future as a family. "There's something else," Jessica continued carefully. "The private investigator I hired found out some disturbing information about Vanessa Torres." Sarah looked up from the divorce papers, hardly believing there could be more devastating news. "She's still legally married to another man, a wealthy businessman in California named David Chen. No relation to me," Jessica added quickly. "They separated 2 years ago, but never finalized their divorce. Vanessa has been using her married name and legal status to access his assets while pursuing other wealthy men. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. That means her relationship with Rick is potentially illegal, and it could void any prenup claims she might have. Exactly. But here's the problem: Rick doesn't know about her existing marriage. If we reveal this information too early, it might drive him away from Vanessa before we can use it strategically. Sarah stood up from the nursery floor, feeling a spark of her old determination returning. The marketing executive who had once conquered impossible campaigns was still inside her, buried under months of domestic contentment in pregnancy hormones. So what do? We let Rick continue to believe he's in control while we gather evidence. And Sarah, we document everything, every conversation, every financial transaction, every lie he tells in court. That evening, Sarah sat in the empty mansion, reviewing the divorce papers and making notes in the margins. She had found her old laptop in the home office and was amazed to discover that her marketing contacts were still intact, her industry knowledge still sharp. While Rick celebrated his new life in luxury hotels, Sarah began plotting his downfall from the home they had built together. She might be financially cornered and emotionally devastated, but she wasn't powerless. Her phone rang, and Rick's name appeared on the screen. Sarah almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Sarah, I know you're upset about the divorce papers, but this is really for the best. We both know our marriage has been over for a long time. Our marriage was over for you long before it was over for me. Rick, I was planning our future while you were planning my destruction. That's not fair. I never wanted to hurt you. But Vanessa and I, we have something special, something real." The casual way he mentioned his mistress's name made Sarah's stomach turn. "Something real, Rick. You've been lying to me for months. About business trips, about meetings, about your feelings. What exactly is real about that? Look, I'm prepared to be generous in the settlement. You can keep the house and I'll make sure you're comfortable. But I need you to agree to shared custody. Emma deserves to have her father in her life." Sarah almost laughed at the irony. Her father who left during her birth to be with his mistress? Her father who hasn't visited her once in the NICU? That father: "I've been busy with work. The business doesn't run itself. The business that you've been systematically hiding from me. The accounts you've moved without my knowledge, that business." There was a long pause, and then Sarah realized she had revealed too much too soon. Rick's voice changed, becoming colder and more calculating. "I don't know what Jessica has been telling you, but you need to be careful about making accusations you can't prove, especially given your current emotional state." "My emotional state? The postpartum depression?" "Sarah, everyone can see you're struggling. Even the hospital staff noticed. Maybe what you need is some time to focus on getting better, while Emma stays with people who can provide stable care." The threat was clear. Rick was going to use her emotional breakdown in the hospital against her, painting her as an unfit mother while positioning himself as the stable, successful father. After Rick hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of her home office, Emma's empty bassinet visible in the adjoining nursery. The man she had loved and trusted for 15 years was systematically destroying everything she held dear. But he had made one crucial error. He had underestimated her intelligence, her resourcefulness, and most importantly, her love for their daughter. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing. If Rick wanted a war, she would give him one. But this battle would be fought with weapons he had never seen her use: the strategic mind that had built marketing empires, the network of contacts he had never bothered to learn about, and the fierce protectiveness of a mother who would do anything to protect her child. The rain continued falling against the windows as Sarah worked through the night, building the foundation of Rick's downfall, one carefully planned step at a time. The pregnant wife betrayed was transforming into something Rick had never imagined possible: a worthy adversary. By morning, Sarah had filled 3 pages with names, strategies, and evidence she would need to gather. The millionaire husband cheating asset division lessons he thought he was teaching her would become the very knowledge she would use to destroy him. Rick Henderson was about to learn that some women don't just survive betrayal, they weaponize it. Sarah's fingers trembled as she inserted the key into Vanessa Torres's apartment door. Jessica stood beside her, acting as both legal counsel and partner in what was technically breaking and entering. But Jessica had argued convincingly that they needed evidence of Vanessa's pattern of targeting wealthy men, and sometimes the law moved too slowly for justice. Remember, we're looking for anything that proves this isn't her first time destroying a marriage for money, Jessica whispered. Financial documents, communications with other men, evidence of her existing marriage. The apartment was everything Sarah had expected from Rick's mistress: expensive, minimalist, and cold. Designer furniture filled the space, but there were no personal touches, no family photos, no indication that anyone actually lived here. It felt like a showroom designed to impress wealthy men. Sarah moved through the living space while Jessica checked the bedroom. In the home office, Sarah found something that made her blood run cold: a detailed planning board covered with photographs, financial documents, and personal information. Not about one wealthy man, but about dozens. The board was labeled Investment Portfolio, but it was really a catalog of wealthy husbands Vanessa had targeted. Rick's photo was prominently displayed in the center, surrounded by details about their marriage, their finances, and their personal lives. Sarah recognized several other men from their social circle, all prominent businessmen, all with wives who had suddenly disappeared from their usual social events. In a filing cabinet, Sarah found folders for each man, containing intimate photographs, recorded conversations, and detailed financial analyses. Vanessa hadn't just seduced these men, she had studied them like a scientist studying lab specimens. "Sarah, you need to see this," Jessica called from the bedroom. In Vanessa's closet, Jessica had discovered a collection of wedding dresses. Not one or two, but 7 different gowns, each with a corresponding file containing marriage certificates to different wealthy men. Vanessa Torres had been married 7 times in the past 5 years, and according to the documents, she was still legally married to at least 3 of them. "She's not just a mistress," Jessica said in amazement. "She's running a sophisticated marriage fraud operation." Sarah photographed everything with her phone, her anger building with each revelation. While she had been suffering through the heartbreaking family drama of her husband's betrayal, Vanessa had been executing a business plan that had already destroyed multiple families. In the master bedroom, they found the most damaging evidence yet: hours of recorded conversations between Vanessa and Rick, dating back 8 months. Sarah played one recording and immediately regretted it. "The pregnancy wasn't planned, but it's actually perfect timing," Rick's voice said clearly. "Sarah will be so focused on the baby that she won't notice when I start moving assets. And if she gets suspicious, we can always claim postpartum depression is making her paranoid." "You're so smart, baby," Vanessa's voice responded. "Much smarter than that boring wife of yours. She has no idea what's coming." Sarah's hands shook as she forwarded the audio file to her own phone. This was proof that Rick's betrayal had been planned, calculated, and designed specifically to destroy her mental health and legal standing. But then they heard footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment. "Vanessa's coming back," Jessica whispered urgently. "We need to go. Now." They barely made it out the back entrance before Vanessa entered through the front door. From their hiding spot in the stairwell, Sarah watched through a crack in the door as Vanessa immediately noticed that her filing cabinet was slightly open. Within minutes, Vanessa was on the phone. "Rick, someone's been in my apartment. I think your crazy wife found out where I live." Sarah couldn't hear Rick's response, but Vanessa's side of the conversation was terrifying enough. "No, I'm sure it was her. Who else would know to look for this stuff? We need to move faster with the custody case. If she has evidence of our planning, she could ruin everything." Sarah and Jessica waited in the stairwell for over an hour, until they were sure Vanessa had left. When they finally emerged, Sarah felt like she had been given both a powerful weapon and a death sentence. The evidence they had gathered could destroy Rick's credibility in court, but it also meant Vanessa and Rick knew they were being investigated. "She's going to file a restraining order against you," Jessica predicted as they drove away. "And she's going to claim you're stalking her due to postpartum depression?" Can she do that? She's done it before. I found records of 3 other restraining orders against wives of her previous targets. It's part of her pattern. She gets them declared mentally unstable, then sweeps in as the stable, supportive girlfriend who can provide better care for any children involved. Sarah felt sick. So by trying to gather evidence against her, I've played right into her plan. Not necessarily. We have recordings now that prove this was all premeditated. That changes everything in a divorce case. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get much worse before it gets better. That evening, Sarah sat in Emma's empty nursery, listening to the recorded conversations between Rick and Vanessa. Each revelation was more devastating than the last. They had planned the timeline of the affair to coincide with her pregnancy. They had researched postpartum depression to use against her. They had even discussed how to make her appear unstable to hospital staff during labor. The woman she had thought was just an opportunistic secretary was actually a professional predator who had perfected the art of destroying families for profit. And Rick, the man she had loved and trusted for 15 years, had been an eager student in Vanessa's school of marital destruction. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her spiral of despair. The caller ID showed Rick's number, but when she answered, Vanessa's voice was on the line. "Mrs. Henderson, I think it's time we had a conversation. I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, but I think you do, especially since you seem so interested in my personal belongings." Sarah's blood ran cold. Vanessa had evidence of the break-in. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Just like you don't know that I'm pregnant with Rick's baby. Just like you don't know that he's been planning to leave you since before your daughter was conceived. Just like you don't know that he never loved you the way he loves me." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "You're lying." "Am I? Rick told me himself that marrying you was a business decision. You came from the right family, had the right connections, could play the perfect wife for his career. But that was 15 years ago, when he needed a certain image. Now he needs someone who can match his success, not just support it from the sidelines." Sarah wanted to hang up, but she needed to hear everything. The pregnancy test was real. "Sarah, Rick is going to have a family with someone who actually deserves him. Someone young enough to give him more children, successful enough to be a real partner, beautiful enough to make him proud." "Rick doesn't love you," Sarah said, though the words felt hollow even to her. "You're just convenient," Vanessa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that what you tell yourself, that this is just a midlife crisis that will pass, Sarah? Rick has been planning this for almost a year. He chose me, and he chose to replace you and your daughter with a new family, a better family." The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with the devastating possibility that everything Vanessa had said was true. Rick wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically replacing his entire family. Sarah looked around the nursery one more time, then closed the door. The woman who had trusted blindly was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. If Vanessa wanted a war, she would get one. But this battle would be fought on Sarah's terms. Using weapons Vanessa had never encountered, the fury of a mother fighting for her child, and the strategic brilliance of a woman who had finally stopped underestimating herself. Sarah opened her laptop and began researching Vanessa's previous victims. If the secretary's secret past was going to be used as a weapon, Sarah would make sure she was the one wielding it. The pregnant wife betrayed was transforming into something more powerful, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. 6 weeks after Emma's birth, Sarah stood in the sterile hallway of the family court building, watching Rick approach with his expensive legal team and Vanessa by his side. Vanessa's pregnancy was now visible, a deliberate display designed to show the court which woman represented Rick's future family. Emma was finally home from the NICU, but the medical bills had exhausted what little money Rick had left in Sarah's accounts. Every day brought new financial pressures: formula, specialized medical equipment, follow-up appointments with pediatric specialists. Meanwhile, Rick lived in a luxury penthouse with his pregnant mistress, claiming poverty when it came to supporting his daughter. Mrs. Henderson, Rick's attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Margaret Walsh, approached with documents. We have a new custody proposal that we think you'll find reasonable. Sarah scanned the papers while Jessica read over her shoulder. Rick was requesting full custody of Emma, claiming that Sarah's mental instability and inability to provide adequate financial support made her an unfit mother. In exchange, he was offering Sarah supervised visitation rights twice a week and a modest monthly allowance. This is insulting, Jessica said sharply. Mr. Henderson has systematically impoverished his wife while enriching himself. He can't claim she's financially unfit when he's the one who created her financial instability. Margaret Walsh smiled coldly. Mr. Henderson's financial responsibility is to his business and his growing family. Mrs. Henderson's inability to maintain employment or stable housing is not his fault. Sarah felt the familiar surge of rage that had become her constant companion. Stable housing. He moved his mistress into our marital home, and I haven't been able to maintain employment because I've been caring for our daughter, who spent the first month of her life in intensive care. According to hospital records, you've shown signs of severe postpartum depression, including paranoid delusions about your husband's fidelity. Several nurses documented concerning behavior during your daughter's birth. Sarah's heart sank. The emotional breakdown she had experienced in the hospital was now being used as evidence against her. The raw pain of discovering Rick's affair while in labor was being twisted into proof of mental illness. But then Jessica smiled, and Sarah knew her friend had found something important. Speaking of fidelity, Jessica said, we have some interesting information about Miss Torres that the court might find relevant. Margaret Walsh's confidence flickered slightly. Ms. Torres is not a party to these proceedings. Actually, she is, as Mr. Henderson's cohabitant and the woman he intends to introduce into his daughter's life. Her background is absolutely relevant to custody decisions. Jessica opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Ms. Torres is currently married to David Chen of Los Angeles, a marriage that was never legally dissolved. She's also been married to 6 other men in the past 5 years, using similar patterns of seduction and financial manipulation. This makes her current relationship with Mr. Henderson technically bigamous. Rick's face went white. Sarah realized that despite all their planning, Vanessa had never told Rick about her existing marriages. That's impossible, Rick said. Vanessa is divorced. The paperwork says otherwise, Jessica continued. And here's what's particularly interesting for custody purposes in 3 of her previous relationships. Ms. Torres gained custody or guardianship of the men's children from previous marriages. In all 3 cases, those children were subsequently removed from her care by social services for neglect and emotional abuse. The courtroom fell silent. Even Margaret Walsh looked shaken by this revelation. Furthermore, Jessica continued, we have recorded evidence that this entire custody battle is part of a premeditated plan to financially destroy Mrs. Henderson while positioning Miss Torres as the primary caregiver for Mr. Henderson's child. Sarah watched Rick's world crumble as Jessica played excerpts from the recordings they had found in Vanessa's apartment. His own voice filled the courtroom, discussing how to use Sarah's pregnancy and postpartum state against her in custody proceedings. But Vanessa was smarter than Sarah had given her credit for. Instead of looking defeated, she suddenly clutched her stomach and cried out in apparent pain. The baby, she gasped. Something's wrong with the baby. Rick immediately rushed to her side, and the court session was suspended while paramedics were called. As Vanessa was wheeled out on a stretcher, she caught Sarah's eye and smiled slightly. The pregnancy crisis was as calculated as everything else in her repertoire. She's buying time, Jessica murmured, and creating sympathy. Later that day, as Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria feeding Emma, she felt the full weight of her situation. Even with evidence of Rick and Vanessa's deception, the custody battle was far from over. Rick had unlimited financial resources and legal representation, while Sarah was burning through her savings just to keep Jessica on retainer. Worse, She was completely alone. Her parents had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, leaving her with no family support. Rick had systematically isolated her from most of their mutual friends, claiming they were too ambitious or bad influences. The few friends she had left were afraid to take sides in such a public and acrimonious divorce. Sarah looked down at Emma, who had finally gained enough weight to be released from medical supervision. Her daughter was beautiful, healthy, and completely dependent on a mother who was barely holding her own life together. Mrs. Henderson, a voice interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital's staff psychologist, approached with a gentle smile. I heard about the custody hearing today. How are you holding up? Sarah had been resistant to therapy, afraid that seeking mental health treatment would be used against her in court. But sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, watching other families celebrate new babies while hers was being torn apart, she realized she needed help. I don't know how to fight anymore, Sarah admitted. Every time I think I've gained ground, something else goes wrong. And now with Vanessa's pregnancy scare, Rick looks like the devoted partner while I look like the vindictive ex-wife. Have you considered that your greatest strength might be your willingness to acknowledge your struggles? Dr. Williams asked. Rick and Vanessa are performing for the court, creating elaborate facades. You're showing real emotions about a genuinely traumatic situation? That's not weakness, Sarah. That's authenticity. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe her emotional responses weren't a liability to be hidden. Maybe they were proof of her genuine love for Emma and her legitimate devastation over Rick's betrayal. Would you be willing to work with me? Dr. Williams asked. Not because you're mentally ill, but because you're dealing with extraordinary circumstances that would challenge anyone's emotional resources. Sarah nodded, realizing that therapy might be the key to both her personal healing and her legal strategy. If she could demonstrate that she was actively addressing her emotional responses to trauma, it would be harder for Rick to claim she was mentally unfit. That evening, Sarah's phone rang with an emergency call from Jessica. Sarah, you need to get to the hospital immediately. There's been an incident with Rick. Sarah's heart stopped. Is he hurt? Is Vanessa okay? Rick is fine, but he's been arrested. Hospital security found him in the NICU, trying to take Emma without authorization. He claimed he had custody rights, but the court hasn't issued any new orders. Sarah raced to the hospital, Emma secured in her car seat. The image of Rick trying to kidnap their daughter while she was helpless and alone in the hospital was terrifying. But as she pulled into the parking garage, Sarah realized this might be the mistake that finally exposed Rick's true character to the court. A father who was genuinely concerned about his child's welfare wouldn't try to remove her from medical supervision without proper authorization. A father who had missed most of her NICU stay due to business meetings wouldn't suddenly become so desperate for custody that he'd risk criminal charges. Rick's attempt to take Emma wasn't about paternal love. It was about control, possession, and winning at any cost. As Sarah walked into the hospital, carrying her daughter and flanked by security guards who would testify about Rick's actions, she felt something shift inside her. The pregnant wife betrayed was finally becoming the empowered mother who would stop at nothing to protect her child. Rick Henderson was about to learn that custody warfare had rules, and he had just violated the most important one: never threaten a mother's access to her child. The luxury divorce due to mistress was about to become a fight for everything that mattered, and Sarah was no longer afraid of losing. She was ready to win. 3 months after Emma's birth, Sarah sat in Dr. Patricia Williams's office for her weekly therapy session, finally beginning to see clearly for the first time in years. The fog of betrayal, exhaustion, and financial terror was lifting, replaced by a sharp clarity that reminded her of the marketing executive she had once been. Tell me about the woman you were before you became Rick's wife, Dr. Williams said during their session. Sarah paused, realizing she hadn't thought of herself as an independent person in over a decade. I was successful. I managed multi-million-dollar campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. I was confident, strategic, financially independent. I had my own apartment, my own car, my own career trajectory. What happened to that woman? I thought I outgrew her. Rick convinced me that being his wife was more important than being successful in my own right. He said he wanted to take care of me, that I shouldn't have to work if I didn't want to. It felt romantic at the time. And now I realize it was manipulation. Every time I mentioned missing my career or wanting to consult part-time, Rick would find ways to make me feel guilty. He'd plan expensive vacations during times when I had potential work opportunities. He'd remind me how much money he was making, how my income was unnecessary, how other wives in our social circle didn't work. Dr. Williams nodded. Financial abuse often looks like generosity from the outside. The revelation was staggering. For 15 years, Sarah had believed she was living a fairy tale marriage where her husband loved her so much he wanted to provide everything. In reality, Rick had been systematically isolating her from her independence, making her economically dependent so she would be easier to control and ultimately discard. But the marketing executive was still inside her, dormant but not dead. Sarah had spent the past month secretly rebuilding her professional network, reaching out to former colleagues and clients who remembered her work. To her amazement, many of them were not only pleased to hear from her, but eager to offer projects. Sarah Henderson, her former boss at Morrison Marketing, had said when she called, "I was just talking about you last week. That campaign you developed for the Meridian Hotel chain is still being used as a case study in our new employee training. Are you looking to get back into consulting?" Within a week, Sarah had 3 potential clients interested in her services. Working from the hospital during Emma's recovery time, she had developed proposal presentations that felt like riding a bicycle after years of walking. Her mind, sharpened by months of strategic thinking about her divorce case, adapted quickly to marketing challenges. The first project was small but significant, rebranding a local spa chain that wanted to attract professional women. Sarah created a campaign called Reclaim Your Power that featured real women who had overcome personal challenges. The irony wasn't lost on her. "You're good at this," Jessica observed, reviewing Sarah's marketing materials. "I mean, really good. This campaign is better than anything the big agencies in the city would produce." "I'd forgotten how much I love solving problems," Sarah replied, "and how good I am at it." The income from consulting wasn't enough to match Rick's lifestyle, but it was enough to give Sarah options she hadn't had in months. More importantly, it was proof that she could survive financially without him. But Rick and Vanessa weren't content to let Sarah rebuild quietly. Margaret Walsh called Jessica with a new legal strategy. "Mr. Henderson is concerned that Mrs. Henderson's work schedule will interfere with her ability to properly care for Emma. Working from home while caring for an infant shows poor judgment and questionable priorities." Sarah laughed when Jessica told her about the complaint. "Poor judgment, I'm working while Emma naps and during her feeding times. Rick has visited her exactly 3 times since she came home from the hospital." "That's what we're going to prove," Jessica said. "I've hired a private investigator to document Rick's actual involvement in Emma's care versus his claims in court documents." The investigation yielded devastating results. While Rick claimed in legal filings that he was desperate for custody because of his deep paternal bond with Emma, the reality was starkly different. He had never attended a pediatric appointment, never bought diapers or formula, never stayed overnight to help with Emma's medical equipment. His visits were limited to photo opportunities that Vanessa could post on social media to support their narrative of being a loving family. Meanwhile, the same investigator had uncovered disturbing information about Rick's business practices. Henderson Development Group was on the verge of bankruptcy, kept afloat only by the cash Rick had diverted from his and Sarah's joint assets. The big deals he claimed to be closing were actually desperate attempts to avoid creditors. "He needs your mother's inheritance," Jessica explained during an emergency meeting. "Your mother left you $3 million in a trust that requires both spouses' signatures to access during marriage. Rick has been planning to divorce you and claim half of that inheritance as community property." Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. That's why the timing was so important. He needed to establish financial need before the divorce was final. Exactly. And there's more. The private investigator found evidence that Rick has been embezzling from his own company's clients, using their deposits for his personal expenses with Vanessa. If the authorities find out, he's looking at serious criminal charges. For the first time since discovering Rick's betrayal, Sarah felt like she held real power. She had evidence of his financial crimes, proof of his lies about wanting custody, and growing financial independence that made his threats less frightening. But the most important discovery was internal, in Dr. Williams's office. Sarah had begun to understand the psychological patterns that had made her vulnerable to Rick's manipulation. "You were raised to be accommodating," Dr. Williams observed, "to put others' needs before your own, to find your value in how well you supported other people's success. Rick didn't have to force you into financial dependence. He just had to make it feel like love." Sarah thought about this insight as she worked on her latest marketing project, a campaign for a women's financial planning service. The tagline she developed was, "Your security shouldn't depend on someone else's promises." And she realized she was writing her own story. That evening, while Emma slept peacefully in her crib, Sarah opened her laptop and began writing. Not a marketing campaign this time, but a detailed plan for destroying Rick's credibility and protecting her daughter's future. She had evidence of his affair, proof of his financial crimes, documentation of his lies about wanting custody, and a growing network of professional contacts who could support her independence. More importantly, she had therapy insights that helped her understand Rick's psychological manipulation tactics, making her immune to his future attempts at control. Sarah looked at her reflection in the laptop screen and barely recognized the woman staring back. The pregnant wife betrayed was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous, a mother fighting for her child with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Rick had awakened something in Sarah that he never expected and couldn't control her own power. The female empowerment after financial betrayal was just beginning, and Rick Henderson was about to discover that the woman he had discarded was far more formidable than the wife he had controlled. The DNA testing facility felt like a courthouse, sterile and intimidating, as Sarah waited for the results that would determine Emma's future. Rick had demanded the paternity test as part of his latest legal strategy, claiming that his timeline concerns about Emma's conception made custody determination impossible without scientific proof. Sarah knew it was another manipulation tactic. Rick was Emma's father, and he knew it. But by questioning paternity, he could delay custody proceedings and create doubt about his financial obligations. Every day of delay meant more legal fees Sarah couldn't afford and more time for Rick to hide assets. Dr. Martinez, who had been present during Emma's conception and birth, had provided affidavits confirming the timeline, but Rick's legal team had found a laboratory willing to suggest that DNA testing was necessary for complete accuracy. "Mrs. Henderson," the lab technician called, "we have your results." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The test confirmed what she had always known: Rick was definitively Emma's biological father, with 99.99% certainty. But there was additional information in the report that made Sarah's blood run cold. The genetic analysis had revealed that Emma carried markers for Huntington's disease, an inherited neurological disorder that typically manifested in middle age. The report noted that this gene must have come from the paternal side, meaning Rick carried the Huntington's gene and had a 50% chance of developing the disease himself. Sarah stared at the papers, understanding flooding through her. Rick had hidden this genetic history from her, never mentioning that his father had died from Huntington's disease when Rick was in college. She remembered Rick claiming his father had died in a car accident, a lie he had maintained throughout their entire marriage. This wasn't just deception about family medical history. Rick had knowingly risked passing a devastating genetic disease to their child while hiding information that could have informed Sarah's pregnancy decisions. She called Jessica immediately. "He lied about his family's medical history for 15 years, Sarah said, her voice shaking with fury. "And now Emma might develop Huntington's disease because of genetic information I never had access to. This changes everything, Jessica replied. Medical fraud in the context of conception decisions is grounds for massive damages. And if Rick knew about his genetic status, his lies could be considered intentional infliction of emotional distress. But when Sarah tried to confront Rick with the DNA results, she discovered he had anticipated this problem. His phone went straight to voicemail, and when she called his office, Vanessa answered. Rick isn't available to discuss Emma's paternity, Vanessa said smoothly. But we're prepared to offer a generous settlement if you'll agree to limit his financial responsibility for any future medical needs. The casual cruelty took Sarah's breath away. Rick and Vanessa were trying to negotiate away Emma's right to medical support for a genetic condition Rick had hidden from her mother. You're asking me to sign away my daughter's medical future for a man who lied about the genetic risks he was passing to her. I'm asking you to be realistic about Rick's obligations. Emma might never develop symptoms, and Rick shouldn't be penalized for genetics he can't control. Genetics he hid from me for 15 years. Ancient history. Rick is building a new family now, one that needs his financial protection. Sarah hung up, realizing that Rick and Vanessa had planned even this conversation. They had known the DNA test would reveal Emma's genetic risk, and they were ready to abandon a child who might require expensive medical care in the future. That evening, Dr. Williams helped Sarah process the devastating implications of Rick's deception. He didn't just lie about his affair, Sarah said. He lied about fundamental medical information that affected our decision to have children. If I had known about the Huntington's gene, I might have chosen genetic counseling, prenatal testing, or different reproductive options. How does this change how you see your marriage? Sarah considered the question carefully. Everything he told me was a lie. His father's death, his family's medical history, his feelings about having children, even his desire for a family was probably calculated around when he wanted to leave me. The next day, Jessica received a call from Rick's business partner, Marcus Chen, who asked for an urgent meeting. Sarah agreed to see him, curious about what Rick's associates might know about his deception. Marcus was younger than Rick, with an earnest demeanor that reminded Sarah of her former colleagues in marketing. He arrived at Jessica's office carrying a briefcase full of documents. I've been Rick's business partner for 3 years, Marcus began, and I need to tell you that he's been using company funds to finance his lifestyle with Vanessa. Sarah wasn't surprised, but the extent of Rick's financial crimes was staggering. Marcus showed them evidence of hundreds of thousands of dollars diverted from client accounts, business loans taken out in the company's name for Rick's personal use, and falsified financial statements designed to hide the missing money. The Henderson Development Group is essentially bankrupt, Marcus continued. Rick has been running a Ponzi scheme for the past year, using new client deposits to pay previous obligations while skimming money for his personal expenses. Why are you telling us this? Jessica asked. Because he's been planning to pin the financial crimes on me. I found documents in his office that would make it look like I authorized the transfers. Rick intends to throw me under the bus when the financial house of cards collapses. Marcus offered to testify against Rick in exchange for immunity and Sarah's promise not to pursue him for damages he hadn't authorized. It was an easy decision. Rick had betrayed not just his wife and child, but his business partner and clients. There's one more thing, Marcus said hesitantly. Rick has been lying to Vanessa too. He told her he was worth about $50 million, but the reality is that he's about $5 million in debt. When she finds out the truth about his finances, I don't think their relationship will survive. Sarah almost felt sorry for Vanessa, then remembered the woman's cruelty about Emma's genetic condition. Whatever happened between Rick and his mistress, Sarah's priority was protecting her daughter's future. That night, Sarah sat in Emma's nursery, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. Emma was beautiful, healthy, and completely unaware that she carried genetic time bombs that might affect her future. But she was also strong, surrounded by people who loved her, and protected by a mother who would never stop fighting for her. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. There's something you need to see. A friend. The email contained security footage from Rick's office building, showing him and Vanessa in heated arguments over the past several weeks. Sarah couldn't hear the audio, but their body language suggested their relationship was already fracturing under the pressure of the custody battle and financial investigation. In the final video, taken just 2 days earlier, Vanessa was seen throwing documents at Rick and storming out of his office. She didn't return, and the timestamp showed Rick sitting alone at his desk for over an hour, looking defeated and isolated. Sarah realized that Rick's perfect new life was already falling apart. The secretary's secret past was catching up with her. The financial crimes were being exposed, and the genetic deception had been revealed. But instead of feeling vindicated, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months' peace. She didn't need Rick to fail for her to succeed. Emma's future was secure, not because Rick would pay for his crimes, but because Sarah had rebuilt her own strength and independence. The DNA test had revealed more than Emma's paternity. It had shown Sarah that even Rick's genetic legacy couldn't define her daughter's future. Emma would grow up knowing the truth about her father, protected by a mother who had learned to value honesty over comfort, independence over security, and authenticity over perfection. Rick's deception had set them free, and Sarah was finally ready to claim that freedom completely. Marcus Chen's law office was modest compared to the luxury firms Rick preferred, but Sarah felt more comfortable there than she had in any legal setting since the custody battle began. Marcus had asked to meet privately, claiming he had evidence that would change everything in Sarah's favor. "I need to start by apologizing," Marcus said as soon as Sarah and Jessica sat down. "I've been documenting Rick's financial crimes for months, but I was too afraid of the legal consequences to come forward earlier." "What changed your mind?" Jessica asked. "Rick tried to frame me for embezzling from the children's charity account." Marcus's voice was tight with anger. "Sarah, do you remember the Harrison Foundation for Pediatric Care? The charity you helped manage?" Sarah's heart sank. The Harrison Foundation was her pride and joy, an organization she had helped build from nothing into a $1 million charity that provided medical equipment to low-income families with sick children. She had spent countless hours fundraising, organizing events, and personally selecting families to receive assistance. "Rick has been stealing from the charity for 8 months," Marcus continued. "Nearly $400,000, taken from the account you helped establish to buy ventilators and heart monitors for babies like Emma." The betrayal cut deeper than Rick's affair, deeper even than his lies about genetic history. Rick had stolen from sick children, using Sarah's humanitarian work as a cover for financing his luxury lifestyle with Vanessa. "We have complete documentation," Marcus said, opening his briefcase. "Bank transfers, forged authorization signatures, falsified board meeting minutes. Rick has been systematically looting the charity while using your reputation and connections to maintain donor confidence." Sarah stared at the evidence, remembering the families she had personally helped through the Harrison Foundation. Single mothers struggling to afford medical equipment for premature babies, grandparents raising children with genetic disorders, families bankrupted by medical expenses who had trusted the charity to provide life-saving equipment. "He stole from dying children," Sarah whispered. "While I was pregnant with his child, he was stealing from other people's sick babies." "It gets worse," Marcus said gently. "The board is planning to announce an investigation next week. When the theft is discovered, they'll likely shut down the charity entirely. Hundreds of families who depend on the Harrison Foundation will lose their only source of medical support." Sarah felt something snap inside her. Rick's betrayal of their marriage had been devastating, but this was monstrous. He had destroyed her life, endangered their daughter's future, and now he was going to destroy her life's work and harm countless vulnerable families. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "I need you to help me gather evidence of Rick's admissions. He's been careless around me, assuming I would never betray him. If you could wear a recording device during a meeting with him, we could get the confessions we need to prove his guilt and possibly recover some of the stolen money." Jessica looked concerned. "Sarah, this could be dangerous. If Rick realizes he's being recorded, there's no telling how he might react." But Sarah was beyond fear. The pregnant wife betrayed had evolved into something Rick had never imagined, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "Set up the meeting," Sarah said firmly. "I'll get his confession." 3 days later, Sarah sat across from Rick in the restaurant where they had celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she needed Rick to feel comfortable and nostalgic enough to drop his guard. The recording device Marcus had provided was virtually invisible, hidden in a button on Sarah's blouse. Rick arrived 20 minutes late, looking haggard and distracted in a way Sarah had never seen before. "You look tired," Sarah observed, genuinely surprised by his appearance. "Business has been stressful," Rick replied. "And Vanessa," he trailed off, then seemed to catch himself. "How's Emma?" "She's beautiful, growing stronger every day. Her doctors say the genetic counseling went well." Rick's face darkened. "About that genetic test, I don't appreciate you making our private family medical history part of legal proceedings. Our family medical history that you lied about for 15 years. I didn't lie. I just didn't see the point in worrying you about something that might never happen." Sarah leaned forward, encouraging him to continue. "Rick, your father died of Huntington's disease. You let me believe he died in a car accident. That's not avoiding worry. That's fraud." "Fraud!" Rick laughed bitterly. "Sarah, you have no idea what real fraud looks like. You think hiding genetic information is deception. I've been managing complex financial arrangements that you couldn't even understand. Like the arrangements with the Harrison Foundation." The question hit its target. Rick's expression shifted from defensive to calculating. "The charity was failing anyway," he said. "Mismanaged, inefficient, bleeding money. I redirected some funds to investments that will ultimately benefit more families." $400,000. Rick, you stole $400,000 from sick children. I borrowed money that was sitting idle in an account, earning minimal interest. The investment returns will more than compensate for the temporary reallocation. Rick was incriminating himself with every word, his business jargon failing to disguise the reality of his theft. "And what about Vanessa? Does she know about your investment strategies?" Rick's mask slipped completely. "Vanessa doesn't understand business complexities. She expects a certain lifestyle, and I've been providing it. But lately, she's been asking too many questions about liquid assets and long-term security. Trouble in paradise. Vanessa thought she was getting a wealthy husband. She's discovering that wealth is more complicated than she anticipated." Rick's voice carried a bitterness that surprised Sarah. "It turns out that women who marry for money aren't very supportive when that money becomes problematic." Sarah realized that Rick's relationship with Vanessa was already over, destroyed by the same financial pressures and deception that had poisoned their marriage. "Rick, why did you really ask me here tonight?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his wine glass. "Because I think I've made some terrible mistakes. With the business, with Vanessa, with us." For a brief moment, Sarah felt a flicker of the love she had once felt for this man. But then she remembered Emma in the NICU while Rick celebrated with his mistress. Remembered the children who would suffer because of his theft. Remembered the years of lies and manipulation. "Some mistakes can't be fixed," Sarah said gently. "Maybe not, but Sarah, if this charity investigation goes public, it will destroy more than just me. Your reputation will be damaged too. You were on the board. You signed some of the transfer authorizations before you knew what they were for." The threat was delivered softly, but it was still a threat. Rick was warning Sarah that he would drag her down with him if she didn't cooperate with covering up his crimes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we work together to quietly resolve the charity situation and find a custody arrangement that works for everyone. Vanessa and I are having some difficulties, and I might be more flexible about Emma's care than I was before." Sarah looked at Rick across the table, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in their 15-year relationship. He wasn't offering reconciliation or genuine cooperation. He was offering to use their daughter as a bargaining chip to avoid criminal prosecution for stealing from sick children. "I need to think about it," Sarah said. standing to leave. Don't think too long, Rick replied. This offer won't be available indefinitely. As Sarah walked to her car, she felt the weight of the recording device against her chest. Rick had confessed to embezzlement, admitted to using stolen charity funds for personal expenses, and threatened to frame Sarah for crimes she hadn't committed. But he had also revealed that his relationship with Vanessa was failing. His business was collapsing, and his carefully constructed new life was already falling apart. The corporate betrayal that had led to ultimate revenge was complete. Rick had given Sarah everything she needed to destroy him legally and financially. But more importantly, he had shown her that his power over her was an illusion. Sarah drove home to Emma, knowing that tomorrow she would deliver the recording to law enforcement and watch Rick's empire crumble. The woman who had once feared losing her husband's love had discovered something far more valuable, her own strength and her daughter's future security. Rick Henderson was about to learn that some betrayals carry consequences that last a lifetime. 6 months after that final dinner, Sarah stood in the courtroom gallery watching Rick Henderson led away in handcuffs. The federal judge had just sentenced him to 8 years in prison for embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. The investigation had uncovered crimes far beyond what Marcus had initially revealed, including tax evasion, securities fraud, and theft from multiple client accounts totaling over $3 million. Sarah felt no joy watching her daughter's father become a convicted felon, but she felt profound relief that Emma would grow up knowing the truth about Rick's character, rather than being manipulated by his lies. Vanessa Torres sat in the front row, visibly pregnant and alone. Her relationship with Rick had imploded the moment his financial crimes became public. The woman who had destroyed marriages for money discovered that there was no money to be gained from Rick Henderson. Within weeks of his arrest, Vanessa had disappeared from Connecticut, leaving behind only unpaid bills and angry creditors. The court awards full physical and legal custody of Emma Grace Henderson to her mother, Sarah Henderson. Judge Morrison announced, Mr. Henderson's parental rights are suspended pending completion of his incarceration and demonstration of rehabilitation. Sarah's custody battle was finally over. Emma would grow up safe, supported, and protected from Rick's manipulation. The recording device had provided the evidence prosecutors needed to build their case, and Rick's confession had eliminated any possibility of claiming innocence. But the victory felt hollow without the person who had made it possible. Marcus Chen had been killed in a car accident 2 months earlier, just days before he was scheduled to testify in Rick's criminal trial. The police investigation had concluded it was a tragic accident, but Sarah suspected Rick's criminal associates might have been involved. Marcus had died a hero, bringing down a financial predator and protecting countless future victims. Dr. Williams met Sarah in the courthouse hallway after the sentencing. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Empty," Sarah replied honestly. "I thought justice would feel more satisfying." Justice often feels anticlimactic. The real victory is what you've built for yourself and Emma while fighting for it. Sarah knew Dr. Williams was right. During the months of legal proceedings, Sarah had transformed her freelance marketing consulting into a thriving business. Henderson Marketing Solutions served primarily women-owned businesses and nonprofits, helping organizations that supported families in crisis. The irony of using Rick's name for her business wasn't lost on Sarah, but she had decided to keep it as a reminder of the woman she had become through survival. "Mrs. Henderson." A young woman approached hesitantly. "I'm Jennifer Walsh. I was married to David Chen, one of Vanessa's previous husbands." Sarah recognized the name from the divorce documents Jessica had found. Jennifer looked to be in her early 30s, well-dressed but with the slightly haunted expression Sarah recognized from her own mirror during the worst days of her betrayal. "Vanessa destroyed my marriage too," Jennifer continued. "My husband left me and our 2 young children for her. When I heard about Rick's arrest and her involvement, I realized this might be my chance to find closure." "What happened to your children?" "Vanessa convinced David to sue for custody, claiming I was mentally unstable. She used the same tactics she used against you. For 6 months, my children lived with them while I fought to prove my sanity in court." Sarah felt sick, realizing how many families Vanessa had destroyed with her calculated cruelty. Did you get them back? Eventually, but by then, Vanessa had moved on to her next target, and David was left alone with two children he didn't know how to raise. He begged me to take them back, but the damage was done. My son still has nightmares about the time he lived with Vanessa. Jennifer handed Sarah a business card. I've started a support group for women who were targeted by marriage predators like Vanessa. We call it Survivors of Financial Abuse. I wondered if you might be interested in joining us, or maybe helping us develop resources for other women going through similar situations. Sarah looked at the card, feeling pieces of her future clicking into place. Her marketing skills, combined with her experience surviving financial and emotional abuse, could help other women recognize and escape similar situations. I'd like that very much, Sarah said. That evening, Sarah sat in Emma's nursery, reading the latest pediatric cardiology report. Emma's heart condition had improved dramatically with proper medical care, and her genetic counselor was optimistic about new treatments for Huntington's disease that might be available by the time symptoms could potentially develop. Emma herself was thriving. At 9 months old, she was reaching developmental milestones ahead of schedule, surrounded by love and stability that Rick's presence would have disrupted. Sarah's phone rang with a call from her editor at Connecticut Business Weekly. Sarah, the article about your business transformation is going to be our cover story next month. We've had incredible response to the advance excerpts. The article titled From Betrayal to Empowerment, How One Mother Built Success from Survival, had generated interview requests from 3 major women's magazines and 2 podcast networks. Sarah's story was resonating with women across the country who had survived similar betrayals. There's something else, her editor continued. A literary agent called asking if you'd be interested in writing a book about your experience. Apparently, there's significant publisher interest in stories about women who rebuild their lives after financial abuse. Sarah considered the offer as she looked around Emma's nursery. The room that had once represented her shattered dreams was now filled with evidence of their rebuilt life photos from Emma's first birthday party. Thank you cards from families helped by the Restored Harrison Foundation. Drawings from the children in Jennifer's support group. I'll think about it, Sarah replied, but she already knew her answer. That night, Sarah opened her laptop and began writing. Not a business proposal this time, but the first chapter of her book. She titled it The Perfect Lie and began with the day she found Rick's photos on his iPad in Dr. Martinez's waiting room. As she wrote, Sarah realized her story wasn't just about surviving betrayal. It was about discovering that the woman she had become through crisis was stronger, more capable, and more authentic than the woman she had been in her seemingly perfect marriage. Sarah looked at her reflection in the laptop screen and smiled at the woman staring back. The pregnant wife betrayed was gone forever, replaced by someone who had learned to find security in her own strength rather than someone else's promises. Emma stirred in her crib, and Sarah went to check on her daughter. As she adjusted Emma's blanket, Sarah made a silent promise Emma would grow up knowing that her value didn't depend on anyone else's approval, that her security came from her own abilities, and that love should never require the sacrifice of independence or honesty. Rick's betrayal had destroyed Sarah's old life, but it had also freed her to build something better. The divorce recovery success story was just beginning, and Sarah was ready to help other women write their own chapters of survival and empowerment. The female entrepreneur after betrayal had found her purpose helping other women discover that they were stronger than their worst moments and more valuable than their most painful losses. Sarah returned to her laptop and continued writing, knowing that every word was another step away from the woman who had been betrayed and toward the woman who would never be victimized again. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the conference room of her marketing firm, presenting quarterly results to her board of advisors. Henderson Marketing Solutions had grown from a desperate attempt at survival into a $1 million business serving clients across New England. The success felt surreal, but also inevitable. The strategic mind that Rick had tried to suppress for 15 years had been unleashed, and Sarah was discovering capabilities she had never imagined possessing. Revenue is up 40% from last quarter. Sarah reported to the board. Our women-owned business initiative has attracted national attention, and we've received partnership offers from 3 major corporations interested in our model. Jennifer Walsh, now Sarah's business partner and head of their nonprofit division, smiled proudly from across the conference table. The Survivors of Financial Abuse organization had helped over 200 women rebuild their lives after economic betrayal, and their workshops were being replicated in 12 other states. Emma, now walking confidently and chattering constantly, played quietly in the corner of the conference room with toys and books. Sarah had designed her business model around being a present mother, never again allowing anyone to suggest that her career and her daughter were incompatible priorities. There's one more item on today's agenda, Sarah continued. I've been asked to keynote the National Conference on Financial Abuse next month. It will mean significant publicity for our work. Dr. Williams, who served on Sarah's advisory board, nodded approvingly. Your book has helped so many women recognize the signs of financial manipulation. The speaking opportunity will expand that impact exponentially. The Perfect Lie, A Mother's Journey from Betrayal to Empowerment, had become a bestseller, resonating with women who had experienced various forms of intimate partner abuse. Sarah had donated all proceeds to the Harrison Foundation, which had been fully restored and was now serving twice as many families as before Rick's theft. As the board meeting concluded, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with financial success. She had built something meaningful from the ashes of her destroyed marriage, transforming her personal trauma into resources that protected other women and children. That evening, Sarah was working in her home office when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. Mrs. Henderson, this is Diane Henderson, Rick's sister. Sarah felt a chill. She had never met Diane, who lived on the West Coast and had remained distant from Rick's family for years. Rick had mentioned her occasionally, always dismissively, claiming she was unstable and jealous of his success. I know this is unexpected, Diane continued, but I wondered if we could meet. There are some things about Rick's situation that I think you should know. What kind of things? Things that might affect Emma's future and yours. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to meet Diane the following day at a coffee shop in downtown Hartford. She arrived early, choosing a corner table where she could observe the other customers and exits. The past year had taught Sarah to be cautious about unexpected approaches from Rick's associates. Diane Henderson was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in her late 30s, with dark hair and an intensity that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of Rick. She carried a thick folder and seemed nervous, checking over her shoulder repeatedly before sitting down. Rick doesn't know I'm here, Diane began immediately. And he can never find out we met. Why? Because I've been helping him plan his comeback from prison, and I need to warn you that everything you think you've won is about to be challenged. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Diane opened her folder, revealing photographs of Sarah leaving her office, attending Emma's daycare, meeting with clients. Someone had been watching her for months, documenting her routines and activities. Rick has been planning his post-prison strategy since the day he was sentenced. He's been using me as his outside coordinator, managing assets he hid before his arrest, and maintaining contacts who will help him rebuild when he's released. Rick lost everything: his business, his assets, his reputation. That's what he wanted everyone to believe. Rick moved over $2 million offshore before his arrest, money the prosecutors never found. He's been using those funds to finance continued surveillance of you in preparation for a new custody challenge. Sarah felt like she was living in a nightmare. The courts terminated his parental rights. Temporarily, his appeals attorney believes they can get his conviction overturned on procedural grounds. Something about improper evidence collection in the charity case. Diane pulled out more documents, showing bank statements and legal filings Sarah had never seen. But that's not the worst part, Diane continued. Rick has been grooming me to take over your life. What The plan is for me to establish a relationship with you, gain your trust, and eventually become involved in Emma's care. Rick believes that if he can't regain custody through the courts, he can regain control through a family member who appears supportive but is actually working for him. Sarah stared at Diane, understanding flooding through her. You've been feeding him information about my business, my routines, my success. For months. I'm sorry, Sarah. I was desperate for money, and Rick convinced me that helping him was just family loyalty. But when I realized he was planning to use Emma as a weapon against you, I couldn't continue. Diane showed Sarah the most damaging evidence, yet detailed financial records of Sarah's business accounts, client lists, and strategic plans. Someone with access to Sarah's confidential information had been sharing everything with Rick. How did you get this information? Marcus Chen's replacement at your business advisory board. Rick arranged for his appointment before he was arrested. David Wong has been Rick's inside source all along. Sarah felt sick. David Wong had been providing excellent financial advice for her business growth, earning her trust and respect over the past 6 months. She had shared detailed information about her plans, her concerns, and her vulnerabilities with someone who was secretly working for Rick. There's more, Diane said quietly. Rick's imprisonment was planned. He arranged to be sentenced to a minimum security facility where he's been able to maintain business relationships and plan his comeback. The car accident that killed Marcus Chen wasn't accidental. Rick ordered it to eliminate the witness who could most effectively testify against him. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus had died because he had tried to help her, and Rick had orchestrated his murder from prison. Why are you telling me this now? Because I realized Rick isn't just planning to regain custody of Emma. He's planning to destroy your business, your reputation, and your independence entirely. He wants you financially and emotionally broken when he gets out of prison so you'll be vulnerable to his manipulation again. Diane handed Sarah a final document that made her hands shake. This is Rick's post-release plan. He intends to claim that your business was built using information stolen from his company, that your book plagiarized his personal experiences, and that your success is fraudulent. Sarah looked at the document, seeing years of strategic planning designed to unravel everything she had built. Rick hadn't been defeated by his imprisonment. He had been playing a longer game, using his sentence as time to plan a more sophisticated form of revenge. What does he want from me? Total surrender. He wants you to dismantle your business, give up custody of Emma, and disappear from his life so he can rebuild without interference. Sarah stood up from the coffee shop table, her mind racing through implications and countermeasures. The woman who had been blindsided by Rick's initial betrayal was no longer naive enough to be destroyed by his continued manipulation. Diane, are you willing to help me stop him? That's why I'm here. I have copies of all his communications, financial records, and strategic plans. Everything you need to prove he's been orchestrating fraud and intimidation from prison. As Sarah drove home, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat, she realized that Rick's final betrayal had revealed the depth of his malice, but also the strength of her own transformation. The pregnant wife betrayed was truly gone forever, replaced by a woman who could outmaneuver the man who had once controlled her completely. That evening, while Sarah called Jessica, and Dr. Williams for an emergency meeting, spread across her dining room table were Diane's documents, proving that Rick's imprisonment was just another phase in his campaign to destroy Sarah's independence. He's been playing chess while we thought we were playing checkers, Jessica observed. But Sarah, he's made one crucial mistake. What's that? He's still underestimating you. Rick thinks you're the same woman he left in that hospital room a year ago. He has no idea what you've become. Sarah looked around the table at the women who had helped her rebuild her life, then at Emma playing contentedly with her toys nearby. Rick had tried to destroy her family, but he had only made it stronger. The sequel potential betrayal stories were just beginning, but this time Sarah was ready. She had survived Rick's worst attempts at destruction and had built something more powerful than he could imagine, a life based on authentic strength rather than controlled dependence. Rick Henderson was about to discover that some women don't just survive betrayal twice, they end it permanently. The final battle was coming, but Sarah was no longer afraid. She was prepared to win. And this time, Rick's defeat would be complete and irreversible. As Sarah tucked Emma into her crib that night, she whispered the same promise she had made in the hospital room where this journey began. They would survive, they would thrive, and they would never again be victims of anyone's deception. The woman Rick had betrayed was gone forever. The woman who would defeat him had only just begun to fight.